I came in from New York, which is where I live and work. And I'm a graphic designer. I've authored pop-up books. I'm an animator, tinkerer. This gives you an idea of what my work is like. So this is my most recent big project I finished. And this is a papercraft animation. So anytime you see movement here, it's because there's a different piece of paper that has been cut out and like stitched together. And I then like composited those elements in a real environment. And this is all like telling the story of planning a California road trip in this software called Dropmark that my friends developed. And it's a drag and drop thing, so I thought it would be really fun if it was like this very touchable, like physical medium. So as a designer, there's historically been these two different tracks in my work that have recently converged in a way that I think is pretty interesting and productive and that I'm going to stay in for a while. So the first of these tracks is that I really like to explain invisible things. That was perfect. So things that are hidden beneath the surface, like processes, flows, numerical abstractions. And I've designed infographics for years and years and still do. And the main activity of data visualization work is really about bringing facts from the abstract or numerical realm into the sphere of human perception so you can see or feel or experience those facts. So that's one part. Then the other part of my work that I'm kind of obsessed with is I really love building things that seem like magic but have no hidden parts. So things that are exceptionally simple and that you can see the whole thing at once but are complex in that they behave in ways that seem more sophisticated than the sum of its parts. And yeah, so I like experimenting with that kind of lo-fi magic with objects, but also with creating animations in weird ways. So a couple months ago, I figured out that I could like cut out stencils on my vinyl cutter and put those stickers on a pane of glass, and then coat the rest of it with this hydrophobic coating, like Rain-X. I don't know, do you all have Rain-X here? Yeah. But then as a designer, I'm like, oh, what can I do with this? I can make typography. So I took some strawberry Fanta and started going crazy drawing letters. And then my next step in this was I turned them into animation frames. So this is 24 frames per second of a Mui Bridge running horse puddle. So this is just kind of an experiment on my desk. It wasn't for a client. It has no purpose. It seems like completely outside of capitalism. But it was really fun. Yay, down with capitalism. All right. So this is another recent animation experiment using the risograph. Is anyone else totally obsessed with risograph printing? Oh my God, yay, my people. Okay, so risograph, as 5 of you know, has notoriously bad registration between colors. So you like design it on the computer and you're like, oh great, the red's gonna line up perfect with the blue. And it's like, nope, no, it's not. So animation, on the other hand, is a technique that requires precision. Everything has to line up perfectly to create this illusion of movement. So I was like, why not put these two things together that do the opposite thing? So I've been working on these risograph animations where the registration kind of goes in and out. And I do that by printing a whole bunch of frames. This one had like 267 frames. And they're all slightly different. It's funny because like when you print them out, they kind of look all the same on the sheet. And they don't appear as an animation until I scan them back in and sequence them again. And then you get this cool, like shimmering, like totally uncontrollable thing. So it's fun because it's kind of like driving a waterbed or something. Like it's, you know, I can make suggestions about the process and what I want it to do, but ultimately those artifacts of print, of registration, of the facts of the machine, of like the different like little Ben-Day dots, like also equally dictate like what's going to happen with these things. And I love that. I love this sort of like collaboration with physical reality and things that I can't totally control. So this warps between 7 different typefaces, and I just kind of like drew the frames in Illustrator and then printed it out on Rezo. I think this is the best one so far. Yeah, so there's a lot of lo-fi magic in the world that kind of feels like a trick. Like you see it once, you're fooled, but then you're never fooled again. Like my cat saw this wolf and is like, is that real? And it's like, no, it's not real. But I think there's an opportunity to things behaving in ways that surprise us. So magic occurs when the world demonstrates that there's a blind spot in our understanding, that we're wrong about something. So this is a book that I made based on research by a Swiss scientist named Emmen Gabrielen, which uses Moiré interference patterns to give the illusion of magnification when you rotate a screen of the same period of dots on top of it. And it seems like maybe it's some sort of like fancy glitch in the material or something like that, but it's actually highlighting something about our perception that we're not fully aware of. So our brains are these great like pattern completing machines. So if you're driving down the road and you see a billboard and part of it's like obstructed by a tree, normally you can like fill in the blanks and complete the word, like you understand what it's about. And the same thing is happening here with your brain, except in this case, it's wrong. So when you have this like very regimented screen on top of a very regimented screen of dots, when you start rotating it, your brain is like, oh, they're circles, they're getting bigger, which, is not the case. So I like getting people to ask why at a thing or experience that they've never before questioned. And I began appreciating the enormous impact that sort of like upending like very fundamental, everyday, humble materials can have as a way to like mess with people's reality with the first really, really big design project I ever worked on. So this was a while ago, 10 years ago now, when the Iraq War was raging, and a group of us felt really, really helpless. Like we were upset about everything that was happening in the world, and there was nothing we could do about it. So we came up with this crazy project, codenamed it Because We Want It, and it was organized by the Yes Men, who are an activist group, and led by my friend Steve Lambert, and executed by a lot of people, including me. And what we did was, early one Thursday morning, we blanketed New York City with an alternate reality, one of our choosing, featuring like a more benevolent type of alternative fact, where we ended the war in Iraq, we closed Guantanamo, we created rail service all over the US. The Appalachia region of the US got high-speed internet, the US government gave land back to Native people. We put in economic policies that we thought would put the country on the path to equity rather than driving the classes further apart. And we set the groundwork for a more informed future citizenry to sort of like future-proof all of these awesome things that just happened. So these are all just headlines, but the paper was written very carefully as a roadmap for progressive victories. And these were all achieved through collective action and popular pressure rather than like one president or congressperson coming in and like saving the day, which more accurately like tracks with like all of history. So we created this little utopian simulation where everything we wanted came true, and we made it not with VR or any kind of technology really, but with paper. By essentially hacking the authority of this familiar morning time object that everyone had seen so much had sort of like faded out into the background. So we dissected a New York Times. we found a style guide that someone within the organization had foolishly forgotten to set to no index and uploaded that told us everything about the typefaces, the kerning, the leading, everything we needed to know to make a perfect, pristine counterfeit depicting our utopian future vision. And so we didn't bother telling the New York Times about these improvements. We just went ahead and mass-produced it. We silk-screened some really cute newsboy aprons to look legitimate on the street. And then we put them in the hands of hundreds of thousands of unsuspecting commuters with a ton of volunteers. And the hoax part of it worked really well. It was so exciting because people could feel for a minute what a different reality might feel like. Everyone wanted to pass out papers in front of the New York Times. Thanks. So our alternative reality was pretty fleeting. Like for most people, it lasted like 5.5 seconds. But our fake newspaper ended up on the real news all over the world, like confusing newscasters in Thailand and Germany and the United States. So, you know, there was a real sense, though, in the air of like, well, why isn't this the real news? All of these sound like good ideas. And it reminded me of this Jane Jacobs quote that I really, really liked, where she says, you know, there's a quality that's even meaner than outright disorder, and that's the dishonest mask of pretend order achieved by suppressing the real order struggling to be served. And I think there was a real feeling in this moment that, like, yes, we have a democracy, like, why can't we have what we want? You know, why are we fighting these wars for oil in other countries? You know, like, this is not what the people want. So it was really amazing. We felt like we succeeded in our goals. There were a lot of angry people too who were like throwing the paper back in our face, but you know, always gonna have that. But as a craftsperson, what I learned was that it was really effective because it's just hard to argue with something that you're holding in your hand. Like, we also created a digital version of the New York Times, and like no one cared at all about that, you know? It was this experience of like something seeming real and unreal at the same time that kind of like pushed it beyond, like into the realm of plausibility. So, you know, in my own work, I realized that wonder itself can be a subversive force. In challenging complacency, whether that's social complacency or complacency about materials or complacency about how our brains work. This is like a much, much smaller scale project that I made for friends for the holidays, just kind of an experimental holiday card. And paper doesn't forget how it's bent, so you can use that material memory to guide people through an experience. And so when my friends got this and picked it up, it is very floppy, and it's clear that it wants to flop in these very specific ways. So you start flopping it, and you realize, oh, it's leading me through this like simple story. And it's a story about itself. So it's literally a 4-frame documentary about receiving this card. Thanks. And it's about as simple as a material can get. Like, I made these on my home printer, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, 15 cuts and 2 glue cuts. And still, like, my friends were then like, how did you do this? And I was like, faced with the task of like trying to explain how it works. And I kind of don't. You know, it's like, I made it, I don't know. But you know, with the card, mechanically, there are just some aspects of knowledge that are unknown to me that I could just barely feel out with my hands. And this is actually like the same exact feeling I get when I work on any graphic design project, even like really traditional stuff that should be easier for me, like menu design. I have to really like feel out what is going to completely work. So like this is a menu that I designed for Russ Daughters, which is this appetizing store in New York's Lower East Side that's been around for like 100 years. And I went through like 85 different versions of it, even though like I did a sketch and I was like, I know it's gonna be like, 4 columns, it's gonna have a logo. I thought I had it all figured out in my head. But why does one font feel better than another? Why, 4 columns rather than 3? Why is white stock better than the beige? There's just a lot of things that go on that, I eventually figured out and people were able to like sit down and eat. But I think that the reason I feel this way, and the reason why like a lot of designers I talk to feel this way, is that like whenever we design, we're always tinkering with the unknown. There's like hidden mechanics behind why we have certain associations with typefaces, why we feel certain ways about different colors. And to sort of demonstrate this idea, let's talk about the color khaki. So khaki brings with it like a lot of cultural associations, a lot of feelings, a lot of history that may vary from place to place. So I've kind of only done this in the US, but does anyone in the audience have any feelings about the color khaki? Does it remind you of anything? Just yell out, you don't have to be so polite. The police. Yes, uniforms. Yes, I think we're all going in the same direction. Grandma's panties. I will not ask about that. Yeah, so everyone's mentioning things. There we go, sweet. Yeah, so we're all talking about textiles. We're talking about uniforms, we're talking about grandma's panties. In the US, most people say pants because there's like a ton of like khaki pants in the culture for some reason. But there is a reason, actually. So, khaki has this like long history and feelings around that history that's largely dominated by its use as a textile. Ah, sweet. Okay, so that history is, sort of, I feel like the base of that mythology is with these sort of like white, male, sort of larger than life characters in history. So this is Teddy Roosevelt and Ernest Hemingway exploring foreign lands by killing things. Conservation. And they got their khaki meaning from the hot weather uniforms of the British colonists in Africa, who they were going there trying to emulate. And they got their khaki meaning from the color of the ground of the Masai Mara itself. So it ostensibly served this original purpose as camouflage, but, it has this historically derived meaning that evolves sort of radically as the context evolved. And like the context around khaki has really changed. In the US, and it sounds like here with the police force being in khaki, like it's typically a work uniform. Like normally if you go to like Catholic school, you have to wear khaki. If you have a job at TGI Fridays, you have to wear khaki. When our president goes out in the golf course and plays golf, he wears khaki. So there's no like exciting like lions or cheetahs out in any of these places. So there's sort of a mismatch between like what people were promised when they're given this khaki uniform and like sort of like the boring workaday situation they're in when they wear it. So yeah, so pretty much khaki is the color of empty promises. And I wanted to give you this like deep dive into the color khaki as just like you know, a useful way to show that like design that not only has color, but has type and layout and movement and context, like how complex the mechanism of, you know, building any design system, like whether it's a business card or a menu, like how deep it goes into our subconscious to like create meaning. So I like to think of all design this way, that it's really about discovering and playing with the underlying mechanics of how the world works, whether that's the mechanics of like how aesthetics trigger emotion, or how ink comes from a pen, or how paper folds. And this is something that we explore and learn and, you know, add to culture through tinkering. So there's usually like 2 different entry points. Oh, I went too far. There we go. Okay, there's usually 2 entry points to knowledge. If you take a Mobius strip, has anyone ever made a Mobius strip? Sweet, the risograph crowd. Yeah. Okay, so one way you can understand a Mobius strip is by reading the Wikipedia entry, which I'm showing you here. It's kind of a nightmare. But you can also learn about a Mobius strip by making one, by taking a strip of paper, twisting it once, taping the ends together, and if you start drawing a line down the middle of this form, it ends in the exact same place where it began. So you've essentially made this little mechanism that turns a 2-sided surface into a single-sided surface. And it's one of those things that like you could have a 3rd grader sit down and do it. It's vastly easier to understand in paper than on paper. And a lot of discovery and like even like formalized science is like this. So for example, at the forefront of translating unsolvable problems back and forth between tinkering thinking and mathematical thinking is this guy at MIT named Eric Demain. And he's translating all of these unsolvable problems in science and engineering into origami. A lot of problems we have today that are unsolvable are actually folding and unfolding problems. So for example, by what pattern should airbags best be folded up within your steering column to most rapidly unfurl upon impact? Or what's the fewest places that you need to cut a folded protein sequence to unravel it and keep the majority of the sequence intact? So by making these problems tangible, researchers are opening them up to this human superpower of physical intuition, allowing the brain and the mind to work together in tandem in a way that really like leads to solutions. And I think that there's this temptation to say that physical things in the physical world, simple things, are somehow less sophisticated or less complex than fancy digital stuff or AI or whatever. But this was an article in the New York Times that came out like in 2017 at the end of it that declared that researchers in Japan had finally figured out how ladybug wings work. So there are these very sophisticated deployable structures that like tuck into the wings and come out, and then they're like double-decker when they come out. So this occurred at the same time that Elon Musk was like launching a space car into outer space. So it's kind of like, yeah, there's like definitely like this weird imbalance in like where we are putting our research and engineering funding. But yeah, ladybugs, they're super cool. Yeah, so in my own work, I realized that I can get much farther along in thinking about complex systems that I can't fully see if I can get a way to have my brain and my hand work together and play with difficult problems. So I have a lot of first world problems. So the main problem that I grapple with is, should I take that job or not? Am I going to be miserable if I say yes to this job, or am I going to be happy? So I was like, well, there's a lot of things to consider here, so maybe I should make a paper calculator and just like outsource the decision to that. So I did. So this format is called a Vovell, and before there were computers or even calculators, there was still this need for calculation. And so these were really like came into being in like the 15th and 16th century. They were used commonly in like astronomy books to show the movement of like the stars and galaxies and planets. But in the 1950s, they were almost like the apps of the 1950s, because they would do like one thing, and they do it really well, and you'd have to have like an entire file drawer of Vovels. So this one is a firm calculator. So you're like turning the wheel, and you're like, oh, I want to harvest 15 bushels of asparagus in the fall. So you like turn the little wheel to like highlight 15 by asparagus, and it's going to tell you exactly how many seeds to get and like when to plant it. And they're cool because it's like, okay, it's cool because like all of the math is physical. So it's this series of nested and cut wheels that take all of the possible outcomes and like through die cuts, winnow it down to the one you want. So they're really fun to take apart, because then you can be like, oh, okay, I can see how selecting that answer would exclude all the other answers, and then I have these left. So it's kind of like a form of logic your eyes can follow and that you can participate in a human level. On mine, which I called the existential calculator because it was solving my existential crises, just to make fun of myself. It's programmed with social science research about what makes people happy in work and what ends up leading to a midlife crisis, when it ends up being terrible for people, which most psychologists and social scientists agree boils down to these four main considerations. So the four considerations that you choose here are, what are the working conditions like? You know, are you getting snacks? Are you working in like a dungeon? You know, how is it? You know, how much is this work good for things? Are you helping the world? Are you destroying the world? Is it wearing on your conscience? Is it a good fit for you or not? And then how much money do you make? So by turning this wheel, all of these things exist on a spectrum, so you kind of like choose where you think you'll fall on that spectrum if you take that job. And it outputs a color in the little window here, and this one's red. Do you all have mood rings here? It's kind of like a mood ring. Like you look at the color and then it like maps to like something. Yeah, so the map is more complicated. You flip it over and you find your color, and then every condition you cross on your way out to the perimeter applies to you. So there's a lot of like overlap here, a lot of adjacency and overlap. So the red zone is like the unbelievably good job, where the working conditions are great, you get tons of snacks, you're doing awesome stuff for the world, you're getting paid a ton, and it's like a perfect fit for you. Like unbelievably good. So it kind of makes fun of those people, but it's fine because they don't really exist. Yeah, and then the brown zone over here is like, you know, you're not making any money, you think it's bad for the world, it's not even a good fit for you, like, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, well, at least you can, you know, this will help you work on your sense of humor and your comedy routine. So it kind of like makes fun of everyone a little bit, but, you know, it's really not that different than like doing an online quiz and having it output an answer to you about what your future will hold. But the difference in it being an analog experience is that once you get here, you can look out at the entire spectrum of work and say, how did I get here? And then start flipping it over and moving the wheels around to sort of like facilitate a philosophical conversation with yourself about like, what is meaningful to me in work? How do I change this? Like, where do I end up if I make less money and do something that's, you know, more in line with what I want to do? Yeah. So I work on a bunch of projects. Thanks. I work on a bunch of projects that sort of prod at this question of like, why are lo-fi things still really appealing in this world of advanced tech? And the first project that I worked on that I felt like, okay, so I have very compelling proof that this is a legitimate question to ask as an artist or designer, was back in 2011, some friends of mine approached me to make their wedding invitation. And since they love music, we decided we wanted to make the card musical. And I ended up taking design inspiration for this project from a really weird place, which I'm not sure. Has anyone ever heard of Mr. Wizard? Okay, so this was in public television in the US. He had a show where he did science experiments with children from like the 1960s to 1980s. And like, you can't find them like anymore, like they pulled them because he was kind of like mean to the kids. But, but yeah. Anyway, I saw this episode of Mr. Wizard where he did this amazing experiment, and I was like, oh, we should definitely use that for the wedding invitation. So what he did was he rolled up a cone of paper and taped it shut and taped a needle to the end of it. And that was enough to make a record player. It didn't sound good, but it was really super cool. So I talked to my friends who were getting married and was like, we shouldn't make like fancy letterpress invitations. We should make record players out of paper for all your friends. And they, for some reason, agreed with me. So we got really excited. And then the onus was on me to figure out how to actually make it work. So I started calling paper suppliers to try to find the paper with the best audio properties, and they pretty much thought I was crazy. But meanwhile, the bride and groom were writing the song, inviting guests to the wedding. And we had it put onto a flexi disc, which most records are made out of vinyl and they're opaque and thick, but flexi discs are acetate and they're thin and incredibly crummy. But we ended up using this format because I wanted to use a clear one with a couple printed on it in black, because that way, every time you turned it, it would complete the couple in a different scenario. So everything that's color is like printed on the underlying page on which the record is mounted. So here they are playing music together, and then eating and drinking and being merry, and then growing old together in funny old person clothes. And the reason that I chose this format was because if all of the materials came in at the last second and just like didn't work, this would be like a design fallback, you know, that it was a complete the picture card rather than a functional record player. But it did work, and this is what it sounds like. So there's a tiny sewing needle at the end of that red dot, and you put it on the record and turn at exactly 45 RPM. Make it a vacation. This is what a real song sounds like, for comparison. Thanks. Yeah, I was really excited when that worked too. So yeah, it was cool, and like, you know, the bride and groom thought it was cool, and our friends thought it was cool. But it was the funniest thing because I uploaded a video of it to the internet, and it went viral, and it was crazy, and it was like on Oprah and daytime TV, and I was like, this is awesome, I'm gonna like enjoy it, but it also doesn't make sense because like all of my friends were standing around complaining about like Spotify not having high enough quality music and like lacking certain like obscure punk rock albums from the 1980s, and I was like, you know, what is it about this? It's crappy, it's lo-fi, it's glitchy. I'm the only one who can really get it to play correctly, honestly. So yeah, I thought I had stumbled upon a really interesting question. You know, I thought about this and I realized that there's this weird dimension in our relationship with our things that modern tech just doesn't get yet. So this is a work in progress, this idea, but you know, modern tech does like succeed in giving us what we want. It has this wish fulfillment component to it, whatever we ask for. The original definition of what tech is supposed to do is ease the burden of humanity, which is really like, this is a great emblem of that idea that's on this paper cutter at this print studio down the street from my house. It's this man, giant man, who's like turning back the clock of time. So you are not gonna have to cut each piece of paper by hand. This machine's gonna do it for you. And just imagine what you could do getting all that time back. So this is what tech does and does well. But what it doesn't do well in all of its black boxness is make the world legible to us in human terms. So I'm going to show an example by Brett Victor, who invented the touchscreen gestures on iPhone. And he has this great article where he makes the case that the scatter plot graph is one of the best inventions of human history. And he talks about how it makes information bioavailable in a way that we can actually use. So if you take numbers in a normal spreadsheet, it's really hard to figure out like what's the biggest number, what's the smallest number, or see any kind of pattern at all. But as soon as you take those same numbers and put them on a map, it immediately like opens up that data to this like human superpower of spatial navigation, that we have developed and honed over thousands and thousands of years just by living and evolving in the world. So automatically you can see like, what's the highest number, what's the lowest number, what's the pattern, what's the spread, where are they concentrated, where are they not, in a way that is completely hidden in a spreadsheet. So, we intellectually think about the world through our bodies, through touch, through our senses, through friction and resistance, much more than is acknowledged. The nervous system doesn't end with the brain alone. It actually extends all the way to the skin. So like all information, not just like the touchy-feely stuff, even technical information flows in through our senses and is understood in that way. Everything we know as humans is some kind of event on the skin. All of these visuals are taken from a paper stop-motion animation that I worked on for Tinybop for this app called The Human Body, which basically lets kids just dive into the human body. It's fun. We're simply hardwired to have this very deep intellectual and philosophical life through our tangible exchanges with physical things. I'm a little over, but I have 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to keep going, unless someone yells at me. So with older mechanical tech, it's often fussy and glitchy. Oh my gosh. This is somewhat mechanical. Okay. Mechanical tech is often fussy and glitchy and crappy and frustrating, but it also gave us this connection point to the larger physical world around us that we're a part of. So anytime you're fussing with an antenna or unsticking of frames on a clock, you're dealing with a physical fact that tells you something interesting about how the world works. So as an artist, whenever I work on a project, I try to let things be unapologetically physical. I try to get the viewer's sense of touch involved. So I'll leave in details like glue marks or strings, because I think all of these things are a meaningful connection point to the hidden infrastructures and forces and systems that guide the world all around us. And I think that's actually why people were super into this, because it brings all that information that you remember from elementary school about how sound works into the physical dimension. So when you're turning your hand on the record, it actually syncopates that motion with the sound coming out. And you realize that, yes, sound is physical in the same way that air is physical and everything else is physical. So learning from this, I feel like the best thing that I can do right now as a designer is sort of facilitate these experiences with the physical world in a way that is meaningful and demonstrative to people. So I've been teaching myself paper engineering these last couple of years. And I've been making books that help people interact with different, very humble aspects of the world, like light and sound. So this one is called This Book is a Camera, which is a very literal title. It's a pop-up book with a camera in it, and you load photo paper into the back of it, and you're able to take pinhole photos by lifting up this little dark slide. It lets light go in through a pinhole and hit the paper in the back. And then you can develop it in instant coffee and baking soda. And the whole thing's totally diagrammed to show why is there a picture forming? Why is it upside down and backwards? What is the light doing? But it also is a pretty good artistic tool. It makes pretty good photographs because the negative is so large. It's 4 inches by 5 inches that, oh, thanks. It doesn't have a lens, so it lacks sharpness, but because there's so much information that's getting on the photo, it seems really rich. So this is on top of the Whitney Museum. And then this one is on the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah, and I developed this while I was a resident at Adobe, and I self-published it, and I had like 3,000 in my closet for a while, and I got rid of all of them. And then the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, republished it, so like now they have like a greater reach. So hopefully you'll see more people looking super cool in public places while everyone else is using their smartphone. So this is the last project I'm going to show. So this is by far the biggest project I've done, which has had the largest reach. This came out at the end of 2017, and is called This Book is a Planetarium. It asks my favorite question of what can paper do, and like seeks to push paper to its like functional maximum. It's also another very super literal title because there is a tiny planetarium in it. But the stated goal is to take these black box concepts from tech, like what is a speaker? What is an electric guitar? What are all these things? And break them down to their bare minimum in paper. So this is a speaker that works with your smartphone, and it just shows the concept of a megaphone and how sound waves can be corralled and they seem louder when you put it in there. And so there's instructions, and then it's like diagrammed as to why it works. And I think the fastest way to explain the book is just to show you this trailer that I made, which shows all of the gadgets. So there's like 6 of them total in the book.
Standing there alone, the ship is waiting, all systems are go. Are you sure?
Yeah, so the point of that book was to get people involved in thinking about tech and science in a way that wasn't like, okay, how does this specific machine work? And more about like, how does the world around me work? And like, how can I build things with the stuff around me that you don't need like really fancy, expensive gear or anything, that you can roll up a cone of paper and like make something that does something. So yeah, I am very out of time, but what I've been doing lately since the book came out was I taught this experimental class at this artist-run school in New York called the School for Poetic Computation. It's run by Zach Lieberman and Tae-Yoon Choi, and they're both super awesome. And it's most of the time it's like people who like work with code and programming who like want to learn more about art and craft. And so I came up with this like paper tech class where I like compiled all existing mechanisms and like paper toys and everything that I knew about, and I put it on this website, cutfoldtemplates.com. So you can go and you can see like a demo video of like each thing, and then like download a template that you can then like print out and make. So there's not like a lot of like hand holding and instructions, but the templates are there and you can use them. Okay, and so this thing was, I co-organized the class and co-taught with this guy named Robbie Kraft, who's developing this awesome resource called rabbitear.org, where it allows you to use your touch screen and fold up origami, and so it shows really clearly like the relationship between the final origami piece and the crease pattern that created it, in a way that like it's so cool and it's so satisfying. It kind of snaps to like what you're supposed to be doing. It's really great. And I've been creating these like instructional risograph sheets that like show different like technical folding patterns. So they're pretty and they can fold them up yourself, but they also like talk a little bit about their application. So this is one that was developed by Ron Resch in the 1960s. This is a modified water bomb fold, and this is being used in like nanotech to like make tiny tunable antennas, which is really crazy. But like a lot of applications, like things that have to go to outer space or things that are in nanotech, it's like you can't use like gears and pulleys and stuff because you can't like scale that stuff down enough. So you need to think of a solution to make mechanical movements in a different way. And so origami is really being drawn on a lot to like figure out how to do that. This is a Miyori fold. This is actually in use by the Japan Space Flyer program for like an array of solar panels in outer space that you can like tilt with like very minimal energy just by like pulling out in one direction. There's also this initiative at the University of Maryland where they're trying to figure out how to like sequence different folding patterns together to make different mechanical movements. So this one is like, all right, well, how do you make a block go up and down in one direction by pushing in from either side? So yeah, there's like a lot of weird, nerdy, cool stuff happening in this space right now. So yeah, a lot of times people ask me where my ideas come from, and like I get a lot of design inspiration from kids' science books, which I think maybe is kind of unusual, but yeah, I'm really into this idea of like paper science stuff. Like there's a guy at Stanford called Manub Prakash who has developed this foldoscope, which is like a 5-cent paper microscope. And it really represents the ideal of this concept of citizen science that like, you know, maybe we can collect interesting data if we give 1 million school kids a 5-cent microscope. Like what kind of data will we collect that's different than if we have, you know, we invest in like 10 $5,000 microscopes that are like locked up in ivory towers and like can't go, you know, out into the mud. So, so yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that are happening as like the digital space and analog space converges. And yeah, so this is pretty much it for me, but I brought as many pop-up books as I could like in my suitcase, and I'm gonna be selling them at a table right out there. And also like, you can come by and say hi and play with one. You don't have to buy one, but I am selling them and signing them. So if you want to come talk to me about pop-up books, I'll be there. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.